The new student's essay about the civil rights movement was read aloud in class, with Ms. Peterson pointing out its scholarly merits and innovative analysis. Other students began sharing their own experiences of feeling marginalized or underestimated, creating dialogues that went far beyond the textbook material. The Building Bridges program expanded beyond just addressing racial bias. Students and teachers together explored various forms of discrimination based on gender, economic background, disability, and more. The school became a laboratory for positive change, with every person playing a part in the transformation. One day, about a month after the assembly, Ms. Peterson asked to speak with the new student after class. The room had emptied, and sunshine streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the once intimidating space. "I want you to know," Ms. Peterson said softly, "that you've taught me more than I could have ever taught you. Your dignity in the face of my behavior, your excellence despite my attempts to dismiss it. You showed everyone what true strength looks like." The new student smiled. "Change isn't easy, but you're proving it's possible." The story of what happened at Riverside High spread to other schools in the district. The principal and his daughter were invited to speak at educational conferences, sharing how one confrontation led to systematic change. Ms. Peterson joined them sometimes, offering her perspective on how educators can recognize and overcome their biases. By the end of the school year, the atmosphere at Riverside High had transformed. The AP History class became known not just for its academic rigor, but for its inclusive and supportive environment. Students from all backgrounds felt empowered to speak up, challenge assumptions, and share their unique perspectives. During the final week of school, students organized a special celebration of their journey. They created a documentary combining the original videos of Ms. Peterson's behavior with footage of the positive changes that followed. It ended with interviews of students sharing how the experience had shaped their views on standing up against injustice. At graduation, the new student received the highest academic honors. Standing at the podium to deliver her speech, she looked out at her classmates, her teachers, and Ms. Peterson, all of them part of a story that began with confronting bias and ended with transforming an entire community. "Sometimes," she said, "the hardest moments in our lives become the most important ones. They show us who we really are and who we can become. But most importantly, they show us that change is always possible when we have the courage to face the truth and the compassion to help others change too." The story of what happened at Riverside High didn't end with that graduation. It lived on in the policies that were implemented, in the students who carried its lessons to colleges and careers, and in Ms. Peterson, who continued to share her journey of transformation with other educators. It became a reminder that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from pushing people away, but from showing them a better path forward, together. The morning assembly was unexpected. Students filed into the auditorium, buzzing with curiosity. The new principal stood at the podium, his presence both commanding and kind. Ms. Peterson sat in the front row, looking different than anyone had ever seen her, humbled, thoughtful, and somewhat nervous. "Good morning, everyone," the principal began. "Today, we're going to have an important conversation about our school community. But first, I'd like to introduce myself properly. As your new principal, I believe in transparency and open dialogue, especially when addressing challenging situations." The auditorium fell silent. Every student, teacher, and staff member leaned forward, sensing the weight of the moment. Yesterday, many of you witnessed or heard about an incident in Ms. Peterson's AP History class. What you may not know is that the student involved is my daughter. I'm sharing this not to create drama, but because this situation has revealed deeper issues that we need to address as a school community. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some students turned to look at the new student, who sat quietly among her classmates, her face composed, but her hands slightly trembling. Rather than simply punish and move on, we're taking this opportunity to make real changes at Riverside High. Ms. Peterson has something she would like to say to all of you. The room grew still as Ms. Peterson walked to the podium. Gone was her usual rigid posture and stern expression. She looked more human than any student had ever seen her. "For 25 years, she began, her voice shaking slightly, I've prided myself on being a strict but fair teacher. Yesterday, I was shown evidence that proved I wasn't as fair as I thought. I saw videos of my own behavior, read statements from students, and finally faced the truth about my actions. She paused, taking a deep breath. I treated students differently based on prejudices I didn't even realize I carried. I judged capabilities based on appearances. I used my position of power to discourage rather than encourage, and I was completely wrong. The auditorium remained silent, hundreds of students and staff members hanging on every word. To the student I accused of cheating, I was wrong. Your essay was exceptional because you are exceptional. To every student I've ever made feel less than capable, I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she continued. But sorry isn't enough. Actions matter more than words. That's why I've agreed to be part of the changes we're implementing at Riverside High. The principal returned to the podium, outlining a comprehensive plan. Starting next week, we're launching a school-wide initiative called Building Bridges. Every teacher, including Ms. Peterson, will undergo extensive training on inclusive education and recognizing unconscious bias. But this isn't just about teachers, it's about all of us. He explained how student representatives would be part of a new Diversity and Inclusion Council, how the curriculum would be reviewed and updated to better reflect diverse perspectives and experiences, how anonymous reporting systems would be put in place to catch discrimination early. Ms. Peterson will be working closely with this council, he continued, not as a teacher giving orders, but as someone learning alongside our students. She's agreed to share her journey of recognition and change, helping others identify and address their own biases. The new student watched as her classmates' expressions changed from skepticism to interest. This wasn't the typical administrative response they'd expected. This was something different, something real. In the weeks that followed, remarkable changes began to unfold. Ms. Peterson's classroom transformed. She started each class by acknowledging a different historical figure who challenged systemic prejudices. She invited guest speakers from various backgrounds to share their perspectives. Most importantly, she listened, really listened, to her students. He turned to Ms. Peterson. You're an experienced teacher with decades of knowledge to share. But you need to understand the harm you've caused and be willing to change. Are you prepared to do that? The room fell silent as everyone waited for her response. Ms. Peterson looked down at the evidence spread before her, the videos, the statements, the graded papers that showed her bias in black and white. For the first time, she saw her actions through others' eyes. Looking up at the new principal, she spoke softly but clearly, "Yes, I want to do better. I need to do better." The new principal muttered, then outlined his proposal to the board. There would be consequences, but also a path forward. What no one in that room knew was that this moment would become a turning point, not just for Ms. Peterson, but for the entire school. As the meeting concluded, Ms. Peterson stepped into the hallway, her world forever changed. Through the window, she could see students arriving for the day, including the new student, the principal's daughter, walking with her head held high, surrounded by supportive classmates. The next phase of this story would challenge everyone involved. But sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important changes. And tomorrow would bring exactly that kind of conversation to Riverside High School. The next morning arrived with a buzz of anticipation in the air. Students clustered in the hallways, phones in hand, showing each other videos from yesterday's confrontation. The new student walked through the corridors, receiving supportive smiles and nods from people she'd never even spoken to before. Ms. Peterson strode confidently into the administration building at 7:45 a.m. sharp, just as she had done every morning for the past 25 years. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she made her way to the conference room. She had spent the entire night preparing her defense, armed with a folder full of what she considered evidence of academic dishonesty. The secretary directed her to the main conference room, where she expected to find the vice principal and maybe a few department heads. Instead, she walked into a room full of serious faces. The vice principal was there, along with the district superintendent, 2 school board members, and a man she didn't recognize sitting at the head of the table. "Good morning, Miss Peterson," the superintendent began. "Please have a seat." Ms. Peterson sat down, clutching her folder like a shield. "I assume this is about yesterday's incident. I have documentation proving my concerns about academic dishonesty." Actually, the man at the head of the table interrupted gently. This meeting is about a pattern of behavior that has been brought to our attention." He smiled warmly, but his eyes were serious. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the new principal, and more importantly, I'm the father of the student you accused of cheating yesterday." The color drained from Ms. Peterson's face. Her folder slipped from her fingers, papers scattering across the table. The room fell silent as the weight of realization crashed down upon her. I don't understand," she stammered, her usual confidence crumbling. "The new principal wasn't supposed to start until next month." "Plans changed," he replied calmly. "I've been observing the school environment for the past week, getting to know the staff and students. What I've witnessed, combined with the evidence brought forward by numerous students and faculty members, is deeply concerning." The vice principal opened a laptop, and suddenly the room was filled with voices from various video clips. Students had documented weeks of subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination. The recordings showed pattern after pattern of unfair treatment, dismissive comments, and targeted harassment. "There's more," the superintendent added, sliding forward a thick folder. "We have written statements from 15 students, 3 teaching assistants, and several parents. We also have copies of graded assignments showing a clear bias in scoring." Ms. Peterson's hands trembled as she looked through the evidence. Her carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. I was just maintaining academic standards," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. The new principal leaned forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "Miss Peterson, I've reviewed my daughter's academic records from her previous school. She was president of their history club. They won state championships. Her essay wasn't just genuine, it was brilliant. But more importantly, no student deserves to be treated the way you've treated her, or any other student who's faced discrimination in your classroom." Tears welled up in Ms. Peterson's eyes. For the first time, she seemed to see the situation clearly. "I never meant. I didn't realize." "Intent doesn't negate impact," the superintendent said quietly. "The question now is, what are we going to do about it?" The school board members exchanged glances. One of them spoke up. Normally, this kind of behavior would result in immediate termination. Ms. Peterson's face went pale. 25 years of teaching, her entire career, flashed before her eyes. But the new principal raised his hand. "If I may suggest an alternative approach, firing Ms. Peterson might address this specific situation, but it won't create lasting change in our school community." Everyone turned to look at him, including Ms. Peterson, whose tears were now flowing freely. "What we have here is an opportunity," he continued. "An opportunity to show our students how to address bias and discrimination in a constructive way. How to learn from our mistakes and grow from them." The new student looked around at her classmates, students who had started as strangers but were now standing up for her, risking their own grades to speak the truth. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back, sitting straight in her chair. "Ms. Peterson," she said calmly, "I would like to take this essay to the administration. They can compare it with my previous work and my old school records. Let them decide if it's genuine. You," Ms. Peterson sputtered, "you have no right to question my judgment. I'm putting you all in detention. Every single one of you." Just then, the classroom door opened. The vice principal stood there, looking concerned. "Miss Peterson, is everything all right?" We could hear the commotion from the hallway. The students began speaking all at once, phones held up, evidence ready to be shown. The vice principal raised a hand for silence, then turned to Ms. Peterson. "I think we need to discuss this in my office. Now." As Ms. Peterson followed the vice principal out, her usual confident stride was gone. She looked smaller somehow, like someone who knew their power was slipping away. The new student sat in her chair, surrounded by supportive classmates, knowing that tomorrow would bring even bigger changes. Her father would be starting as principal, and this incident would be his first major challenge. But looking at her fellow students, their phones full of evidence, their voices raised in support of what was right, she knew she wasn't facing this alone anymore. The bell rang, but nobody moved. They sat there, united in their stand against injustice, knowing that they had just been part of something important. Something that would change their school forever. As they finally began packing up their books, one student turned to the new girl and said, "You know what? I can't wait to see what happens next." Neither could she. because tomorrow would bring a revelation that Ms. Peterson never saw coming, one that would force her to face her prejudices in front of the entire school community. The breaking point came during the pre-midterm review session. The classroom was more crowded than usual, with students eager to prepare for the upcoming test. Everyone could feel the tension in the air as Ms. Peterson walked in, carrying a stack of graded essays. "Before we begin our review," Ms. Peterson announced, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter, "I need to address something serious." She pulled out one essay from the stack, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "This essay about the civil rights movement is problematic." The new student's heart sank. She knew it was her paper before Ms. Peterson even said her name. She had spent hours on that essay, pouring her heart into every word, drawing from both historical facts and personal understanding of the movement's significance. "Would you care to explain," Ms. Peterson said, walking slowly toward the new student's desk, "how a transfer student suddenly writes at a college level? This vocabulary, these insights. They seem rather advanced for someone who just joined our class." The room fell completely silent. Students exchanged worried glances. The girl who had been documenting everything quickly pulled out her phone again, hiding it beneath her textbook. "I wrote that essay myself," the new student said firmly, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "Every word of it." "Really?" Ms. Peterson's tone dripped with disbelief. "Then you wouldn't mind explaining your analysis of King's letter from Birmingham jail right now, in front of the class?" Without hesitation, the new student began speaking, her words flowing naturally as she explained the historical context, the significance of civil disobedience, and the lasting impact of the letter. Her classmates listened intently, some nodding in appreciation of her knowledge. But Miss Peterson wasn't satisfied. "Stop," she interrupted. "This proves nothing. Memorizing facts doesn't make this essay genuine. I've been teaching for 25 years. And I know when work isn't original." That's when something unexpected happened. A quiet boy in the back, who rarely spoke in class, raised his hand. "Ms. Peterson, I was in the library when she was writing that essay. She spent 3 hours there, using reference books and taking notes. I saw her working on it." "Me too," another student chimed in. "She asked me to proofread it. I watched her write every page." Ms. Peterson's face flushed red. "That's enough. This is not up for discussion. I'm reporting this as a case of academic dishonesty." The new student felt her hands trembling, but her voice remained steady. "Ms. Peterson, I have the rough drafts. I have my research notes. I can prove this is my work." "Your previous essays were nowhere near this level," Ms. Peterson shot back. "Are you suggesting those were beneath your abilities?" A brave student in the front row spoke up. "Maybe she didn't do as well before because you kept interrupting her answers and marking her down unfairly." "Yeah," another joined in. "We've all seen how you treat her differently." "Everyone has noticed," a third student added. "We have videos." The classroom erupted in voices, students speaking over each other to share what they had witnessed over the past weeks. Some pulled out their phones, showing recorded incidents to their classmates. The evidence they had been gathering was finally coming to light. Ms. Peterson's face went from red to pale. "Put those phones away immediately. This is complete insubordination." "No," Lee stood up, his voice shaking but determined. "This is wrong, and we're not going to pretend it isn't anymore." The new student managed a small smile, grateful for their support. But inside, she was wrestling with a difficult decision. She hadn't wanted to tell her father about any of this, hoping to handle it on her own. She wanted to be known for her own merits, not as the principal's daughter. But as Ms. Peterson's behavior escalated, she wondered if staying quiet was the right choice. At the end of class, Ms. Peterson made an announcement that seemed targeted at one person in particular. "Remember, class, academic integrity is extremely important in AP courses. Any suspected cheating will be reported immediately, and the consequences will be severe." As students packed up their things, the whispers grew louder. The girl who had been recording showed her phone to others, their faces darkening as they watched the video. Some students were already talking about taking the evidence to the administration. Walking out of class, Lee caught up with the new student again. "This has gone too far," he said. "We're all seeing it. It's not just strict teaching anymore, it's something else." The new student nodded, clutching her books tighter. I know. I need to think about how to handle this. What she couldn't tell them was that she already had a powerful ally in the school system, one who would be starting very soon. As she walked to her next class, she made a decision. Tonight, she would talk to her father. Not as the incoming principal, but as her dad, who had always taught her to stand up for what was right. Little did Ms. Peterson know, her weeks of unfair treatment weren't just being noticed by students anymore. The evidence was building, the witnesses were speaking up, and a reckoning was coming. One that would force her to face her own prejudices in front of the very people she had tried to intimidate and dismiss. The new student walked down the hallway, surrounded by supportive classmates, knowing that tomorrow would bring changes that nobody in the class could predict, especially not Ms. Peterson. Over the next few weeks, the situation in AP History class went from bad to worse. Every day brought new challenges for the new student, who tried her best to keep her head high despite Ms. Peterson's increasingly obvious behavior. One particularly tense morning, the class was discussing World War I. The new student had done extra research the night before, wanting to prove herself through her work rather than confrontation. When Ms. Peterson asked about the significance of the Allied Powers strategy, several hands shot up, including hers. Let's see. Ms. Peterson's eyes swept across the room, deliberately skipping over the new student's raised hand. Anyone? Surely someone must know this. She continued to ignore the new student, whose arm was starting to tire from being held up so long. Finally, Lee spoke up without being called on. "Why don't you ask her?" he said, pointing to the new student. "She's had her hand up this whole time." The classroom fell silent. Ms. Peterson's face tightened. "I don't appreciate interruptions in my class," she said coldly, "and I certainly don't need suggestions about who to call on." But Lee wasn't backing down. "It's just, she always knows the answers, and you never pick her." Other students began nodding in agreement. A girl in the front row pulled out her phone and started recording discreetly under her desk, sensing that something important was happening. Ms. Peterson's voice turned sharp as a knife. "Well, since you're also interested in her participation, let's see what she has to say. Go ahead," she gestured to the new student. "Enlighten us." Taking a deep breath, the new student began explaining the Allied Powers' strategic decisions, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Her answer was detailed and well-researched, drawing connections that even Ms. Peterson hadn't covered in class. Instead of acknowledging the excellent response, Ms. Peterson's eyes narrowed. "That sounds suspiciously like it was memorized from a textbook. Did you perhaps copy this from somewhere?" The accusation hung heavy in the air. Several students gasped quietly. The girl with the phone kept recording. "No, ma'am," the new student replied steadily. "I did extra reading last night because I find this topic interesting. I can cite my sources if you'd like." "Extra reading?" Ms. Peterson's laugh was cold. "I find it hard to believe that you're suddenly such an expert. In my experience, students who transfer mid-year usually struggle to keep up, let alone excel." The implications in her tone were clear to everyone. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One boy near the window muttered, "This isn't right," just loud enough to be heard. The new student felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her composure. "I was in the history club at my previous school. We won regional competitions. I can show you my certificates." "That won't be necessary," Ms. Peterson cut her off. "Though I must say, it's interesting how you always have an explanation ready. Very convenient." Just then, another student raised her hand. "Miss Peterson, I looked up what she said on my phone, and she's right about everything. Here, look." Phones away. Ms. Peterson snapped. "This is still my classroom, and I won't have my authority questioned by students who think they know better than their teacher." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The new student noticed several of her classmates typing on their phones under their desks, some taking pictures, others sending messages. She later learned they were documenting everything, creating a record of Ms. Peterson's behavior. During group work that day, more students than ever wanted to work with the new student, almost like a quiet rebellion against Ms. Peterson's treatment. They whispered encouragement when the teacher wasn't looking. "We've got your back," one girl said quietly as they worked on their assignment. "My older sister had Ms. Peterson last year," another student added. "She was strict, but never like this. Something's different this time. No, ma'am, they replied in unison, quickly returning to their worksheets. As the class progressed, it became increasingly clear that Miss Peterson had decided something about the new student before even giving her a chance. When reviewing the group work, she questioned every answer from their group with extra scrutiny, even though they were correct. "Are you sure about these responses?" Ms. Peterson asked, hovering over their desk. This level of analysis seems unexpected from a new addition to the class. The bell couldn't ring soon enough. As students packed up their belongings, Ms. Peterson called out, "Remember, tomorrow's essay will count for 20% of your grade. No exceptions or special treatment for anyone." The new student carefully placed her books in her backpack, her mind already racing about how to handle this situation. She couldn't help but think about her father, who would be starting his new position as principal next month. They had decided together that she would start school first, giving her a chance to settle in on her own terms. Walking out of the classroom, she heard a few students whispering among themselves. "Did you see how Miss Peterson treated her? Yeah, that was weird, even for her. Someone should say something." In the hallway, Lee caught up with her. "Hey, don't worry too much about Miss Peterson. Your work was really good. I learned some new things today just working with you." She managed a small smile. "Thanks, I just hope tomorrow goes better." But as she headed to her next class, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. What she didn't know was how right she was, and how the coming weeks would reveal not just the extent of Miss Peterson's prejudice, but also lead to changes that would impact the entire school. Little did Miss Peterson know, her actions weren't just affecting any new student, she was unknowingly creating a situation that would soon force her to confront her own biases in a very public way. The new principal's daughter walked to her next class, holding her head high despite the morning's events, carrying with her a quiet strength that would soon reshape the entire dynamic of Riverside High School. The halls of Riverside High School buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy when a new face appeared among the crowd. A young girl with warm brown eyes and neatly braided hair clutched her schedule, trying to navigate the unfamiliar corridors. She had just moved to the city with her father, but what most people didn't know was that her dad was about to become a very important figure at the school. "Room 204, room 204, she whispered to herself, scanning the numbers on the classroom doors. Her previous school had been much smaller, and the maze-like hallways of Riverside High felt overwhelming. A friendly student noticed her confusion and pointed her in the right direction. When she finally found her AP History classroom, most seats were already taken. The teacher, Miss Peterson, stood at the front of the room with perfect posture, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked like she had been teaching since the beginning of time itself. "You're late," Miss Peterson announced sharply, even though the bell hadn't rung yet. The new student apologized softly and found an empty seat near the back. She could feel everyone's eyes on her as she took out her notebook and pencil case. "We don't operate on whenever you feel like showing up time here," Miss Peterson continued, her voice dripping with disapproval. "This is advanced placement history. We have standards." A few students exchanged uncomfortable glances. The new girl kept her eyes down, arranging her supplies on her desk with trembling hands. She had always been an excellent student, straight A's, perfect attendance, glowing recommendations from her previous teachers. But something in Miss Peterson's tone made her stomach twist into knots. Throughout that first class, Miss Peterson seemed to go out of her way to make things difficult. When the new student raised her hand to answer a question about the Civil War, a topic she had extensively studied at her previous school, Miss Peterson deliberately ignored her. Instead, she called on other students, even those who weren't volunteering. "Now, class," Miss Peterson said, pacing between the desks, "can anyone tell me? Anyone who's been here since the beginning of the semester, that is, about the significance of the Emancipation Proclamation?" The new student's hands slowly lowered as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just first-day awkwardness or a teacher's strict personality. There was something else going on, something that made her feel smaller with each passing minute. During the group assignment portion of class, no one immediately asked her to join their group. Not because they were unfriendly, but because Miss Peterson had already announced, "Work with your usual partners. We don't want to disrupt the flow we've established." A kind-hearted student named Lee finally waved her over to join his group. As they worked together on the assignment, Lee whispered, "Don't take it personally. Ms. Peterson's always been particular, but this seems different." The new student nodded, focusing on contributing to the group work. Her previous school's history club had won regional competitions, and she knew this material inside and out. As she shared her insights, her group members looked impressed. "Wow, you really know your stuff," another group member whispered, but their conversation was cut short by Ms. Peterson's sharp voice. "Is there a problem over here? This is group work, not social hour."